Welcome to Bowers. I'm very happy to be here. I had the opportunity to come and work with Guo Pei and the Bowers Museum this past summer. And so we're going to be doing a quick overview in the next 45 minutes about Guo Pei's work. And I've added some things. I had the opportunity to go to Singapore and see the exhibition there. And I know that in 2021, very exciting news that the Bowers will have another exhibition. So I will start with Guo Pei's story. This is really important because her background and her history and her story is so important to how she perceives her work, that she came from this period of darkness, we'll say darkness. And the United States, the first major exhibition of her work was done at the Savannah College of Art and Design Fashion Museum called SCAD-FASH, which we had in Savannah in 2017. And then it traveled to Vancouver and then it got to the Bowers. So let's go back in time a little bit with Guo Pei and talk about one of the most influential people, the most 100 influential people that happened in 2017 by Time Magazine. The Business of Fashion, one of the 500 people shaping the global fashion industry. Also, she has been listed on any fashion industry site, CNN. Her daughter Daisy is actually a SCAD student, which is very lovely. And now she's at the Bowers Museum coming in 2021. So there's been a lot of exciting news about Guo Pei. So we talk about Guo Pei's story. We have to understand that she grew up during the Cultural Revolution. And this is a time where Mao was about getting rid of the four olds. Anything that had to do with capitalists were considered bourgeois. And so this is the kind of clothes that she saw. These are how people dressed. Think about drab. There's no embroidery. There was nothing elegant about those dresses, nothing about those clothes. So here she is, without seeing a book, without seeing video, without seeing embroidery, but her grandmother's story and the stories of her life before this period during Qing Dynasty was what fueled her imagination. And so those days were gone. And then what happened was, so were the days of Mao. And when Mao died, Tang came and turned over that whole terrible period of getting rid of the four olds, opened up economic reform. 1996, 1978, the easing of the restrictions took place with a cultural economic reform, helped to create Chinese business, Chinese industry. And Guo Pei applied for a position in an art and design school that still exists now. It's called the Beijing Second Light Industry School then, and now it's the Beijing Institute of Fashion. She was one of 500 students that had applied, and 26 were accepted. And of course, Guo Pei was accepted. And at that time, there was no word for fashion in Mandarin. You understand that they didn't understand that clothes had to be designed. It was that went from the Mao suit to, well, what we don't know is what we've not seen of Guo Pei's work in 1997. That is Guo Pei on the left. And this is one of her first independent collections on the right. So yes, Guo Pei did design and does design real clothes for real people. But I will tell you, after many years of doing that, she worked for a company called Tianma, and she also had a company called the Milano Group, and she did extremely well. As a woman, she sold millions of dresses. She realized, looking out, seeing all these women running around Beijing wearing her clothes, and she decided she was in an iron rice bowl job, which is this steady job. And Guo Pei decided to leave that job. And what she did was open this rose studio which is in the 798 Art District in Beijing. And she met her husband, Jack, and Jack helped her with this project. So this is Rose Studio. Now think about this. You just saw the demolition of anything that had to do with capitalism and those kind of mouse suits that were awful, not kind of, those mouse suits that were awful. And here's Rose Studio, where she keeps everything. This is where she has her archive, where her seamstresses work, her artisans work. This is where the magic happens in Rose Studio. And so what I love about this is that they fell in love. She fell in love with Jack. Jack was at that time a Taiwanese and still a Taiwanese textile importer, exporter. And when they got engaged, he said to her, okay, so you have the opportunity of getting a big diamond or getting 60,000 meters of fabric, which is, I've heard between 60 and 80,000. So of course, what do you think she took? She took the fabric. And so what I understand, he still owes her some fabric, but I'm not so sure. But this is where it all happens. And what's beautiful about this is what she has done with her artisans. Her artisans are her most precious asset. They are nurtured by her from day one. We started from scratch, and I'm very proud of the work that they still do today, and that's Guo Pei's quote. And what Guo Pei has done in this revival of what could have been an extinct industry of royal embroidery, of this kind of handcraft that's gone to a level where it's considered an intangible cultural heritage, where she has taken the style and the techniques of traditional embroidery and has incorporated many of her own techniques. And I say, when I would do my talk at the Bowers, I would say, it's the ancient Chinese secret that she has, that's Couture secret, that people would ask, well, how does she do that? And how does that happen? And I say, I don't know. I don't want to know, but I do know. But I don't want to say because that would take away the magic. Hopefully you'll be able to see some of that magic again. So she has taken artisans from many different provinces in China that specifically deal with it. Suzhou is one of them. And this is a 19th century print of royal embroidery. And you can see that the technique, I mean, we wish we can get her hair out of the way, but they're still working in the same style, in the same technique. She started to sew at age 2. And her grandmother told her these stories. So of course, she asked her grandmother a lot of questions. And she had to seek out artisans because, think about this, they had to hide all of this. They could not show that they knew how to do these embroideries. That was considered one of the 4 O's. And so she went into the provinces to seek out at least between 300 and 450 artisans. That's how many she employs, up to 500 artisans now, trained in this specialized technique of Chinese embroidery. And she creates between 3,000 and 4,000 pieces. She has 500 regular clients. And now this is before actually her whole couture business started, but we can go and see the detail of this beautiful embroidery and how gorgeous this is, what she's done for China and what she's doing for the industry and what she's doing for these young women, which is really important, is teaching them a skill that they would not normally have. So the phrase is, it takes a village. Yes, it takes a village. It takes a team of artisans to work on all of this. This is one incredible dress. And I have to talk to you about embroidery. So doing embroidery is like having a signature. And so when she does these pieces that take up to 2 years, 2.5 years, you have to make sure that your team is the same. Otherwise, you have a different signature on your handwriting. So this is how she does. They create these teams, they create this work, and they stay together. So this is a really beautiful thing. Now, you have to understand how this is where you're thinking about making money. How does she make money? Well, they're very smart about this, and they've created a membership. And so Jack, the business model, is created a membership where you have to pay up to 800 USD. In this way, you create this club and you pay in, and this way you're guaranteed if you order a dress, then the money comes out of your membership, so that you're not stuck, because Jack was thinking, well, people can say, I have to go, I have to leave. And what Guo Pei says is that time is life. And she understands that. So you get an idea of, there must be at least 17 people working on this. There's the head seamstress there, hand sewing all of these pearls onto this magnificently knitted garment. This was in the show, and when you see this, this is the piece that I want in my house, in my closet. So I will tell you this, as far as, according to Guo Pei, this was the most difficult. When you see all the images, she feels this is the most difficult piece that she had to do. And it's because the silver thread, she used actual silver thread. So the silver thread would break every 7th stitch, it would break. It took them hours to do this, hours. It is so magnificent because it's silver thread on a black sheath underneath. And it was so difficult, and she felt so accomplished when she finished it, when her team finished it. And she took strands of her hair, she's very dark, thick hair, beautiful hair, and she embroidered her name inside the lining of the jacket, which is incredible, incredible. It's a beautiful, gorgeous piece. So we will go to the next piece. Let's see now. Let's move on to the next one. And so we have to talk about her work in the Beijing Olympics. We go back for a minute to 2008. So we saw her 1996, 97, cool, hot pants. She decided after that in 2003 and 4 that she wanted to just do couture. She felt, and we're going to talk about that when we see that she needed to do this thing. So in 2008, she was asked to do the Beijing Olympics. And this is Placido Domingo singing with Sun Zuying in a Guo Pei dress that had over 200,000 Swarovski crystals, all placed by hand, which is incredible. So I think when we talk about her wanting to do couture and the Chinese way of thinking that made in China is not worthy, that it's fast and cheap, that she wanted to change the notion of what made in China means. And so she spends her time, a long period of time, with love and dedication, that she wants her clothes to outlive her. And I think if something's encrusted with 250,000 plus Swarovski crystals, that's an opulent garment that she's going to leave behind. And that's something that she's been wanting to do since she was a child. So we will go to her childhood memories and her childhood visions and the things that her grandmother taught her. And so here is the imperial emperor wearing yellow. We have to talk about yellow. It's very important because she wanted as a young girl, she wanted a dress that was yellow. And her grandmother said, you cannot have a yellow dress. Yellow is only worn by the emperor. Yellow is forbidden. Now, if you tell a young girl growing up in now post-Mao China that yellow is forbidden with some brains, what do you think she's going to do? She's going to make something that's yellow. And the most iconic piece that she made, that's yellow, is the piece that made her famous, which is the Rihanna dress from 2015 at the Met Gala. 55 pounds of silk and fur and embroidery that took almost 2 years to make. That the story is that this was from a 2010 collection, and Rihanna wanted to see it. She was Googling, she went online, I'm sure she had the help of Anna Wintour, and she called Guo Pei's office and said, I would like to wear that dress for the Met Gala. And Guo Pei, they said to Guo Pei, Rihanna would like to wear that dress. And everybody knows the story, but I love saying it. Guo Pei didn't know who Rihanna was. So the story is, okay, Guo Pei has to go to New York anyway. I'm going to put the dress in the box. Maybe, I think my story is that Anna Wintour called Guo Pei and said, I think you should meet her. And that happened. When Rihanna went to the hotel and met Guo Pei, she saw this is a queen, and this woman can definitely wear this piece and carry this piece. Now, this kind of train is not something that would come from Imperial China. The robes were not allowed to be dragged on the floor. So what this goes back to is looking at Napoleon and Josephine's coronation and court gown and court dress. You see the beautiful long train. So this is where Guo Pei has this gorgeous sense of globally multiculturalism, which I say, with historic fashion insider study and history and art history, and she mixes it all together with East and West and does these magnificent creations. Now, I'm going to show you, there is one of my favorite pictures of Marie Antoinette on the left in 1769, a very young Marie Antoinette, and where Guo Pei gets references from. French history, French fashion. Look at the sleeve of Marie Antoinette and look at the sleeve of Guo Pei's great queen. This is what's called engagance. And so how she's incorporated all of these elements together, which is so beautiful. Now, I will show you this beautiful image of that Rihanna dress. And at SCAD, we did a book called Beyond Couture. And this was a composite. It's really like a capriccio. Composite image done by Howe Collective, which is really quite beautiful. The dress did not sit on the floor of the grass, but the way the designers, Jim Lind, Patrick O'Brien, Elliot Ross, and Forrest Woodward, they created these fantasy dreamscapes, which really, Guo Pei is all about telling stories and fantasy. They interpreted a lot of this and put this in this beautiful image of the model wearing, and this beautiful bird phoenix there in this garden, which is in Atlanta, but the light tower that you see in the back, the lighthouse, is in South Carolina. So that's what a composite is, which is really very interesting. So another great queen is this magnificent image of Carmen del Artifice. This woman was 80 years old in this picture. She's one of the most magnificent models ever. She goes back to the 1940s. Irving Penn photographed her, Richard Avedon photographed her. And this is from the 1002 Nights collection in 2012. Actually 83 years old in this picture. So Guo Pei wanted her to be in this and model this because Guo Pei understands that beauty has no age limit. And she wanted her to be the one who carried this heavier than the Rihanna dress. More embroidery, Cardozi embroidery, Persian Cardozi embroidery, very heavily raised. And even the color palette is different. The pattern is enormous. You can see that this immortal beauty, she's got 6-inch shoes, which we're going to show you in a minute. But the most exciting thing that I found out today is that, you know, the Met Gala is on May 4th. It's the first Monday in May. And unfortunately, it had to be canceled. So a little bird told me that the dress that Lady Gaga was supposed to wear to the Met Gala was 1002 Nights, this queen. I can't even tell you. You guys are the first to know in the presentation that Gaga was going to wear this, which makes my heart just go crazy. So let's start with this one, because this is really where she started to think about couture and thinking, I just want to do couture. And it started with a pair of shoes in 2003 that you had at the Bowers Museum, the Bowers exhibition. This dress took 50,000 hours to make. And it's been inspired by both East and West, and I want to show you both. And so this comes from a collection called Sansara, which means, what is Sansara, is the color of the soul. And she had to adjust so many times the embroidery with her team. The thing about Sansara is life cycle, is the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And the way that she interprets that in the dress is the continuation of the pattern going all around. And so that's what she did with this. And in the way that gold, Dai Jing, means is the ultimate, the color of the soul, that she believes it's the color of the soul. This was in the exhibition at the Met Costume Institute, was tied through the looking glass. And this is the most interesting thing, is that she references Napoleon and military costume. So here you can see she went to Paris in the Musée l'Armée, and she, I don't know how this is happening here. She was inspired by the embroidery, the French embroidery, and she was feeling that, looking at Napoleon on the right, going into battle, wearing these incredible clothes, these beautiful outfits, that there was some kind of majesty and nobility and elegance about going into battle and facing death dressed so beautifully. Now you realize that her father was in the military in China, and it's like perhaps an homage to him. So she definitely believes in history and inspiration. I'll read a quote to you. It says, "I believe that design can never be too far away from the past. Designers should learn about the past to inform their own designs and become part of the history of themselves." And so here you see Napoleon, but I want to show you this Christian Dior couture dress from the 1955-1956 collection. There's a very strong similarity in the shape and in the repetitive design, and this is not a mistake, because Guo Pei understands fashion history. She's a student of fashion history. She goes to the museums. She understands design. She knows and incorporates both the East and the West into her work. Now here's a close-up of the lotus. The lotus represents purity, because the lotus flower comes up from the mud and is still white and is still white after going through that. And that's what purity means for her. So this is magnificent gold. But I will show you something else. In the Eastern tradition, where the use of gold is done with this tanka of, this was Shakyamuni Buddha of the 15th century, from the exhibition at the Asia Civilization Museum. This is a panel that is used by monks to practice in their meditation. And so she's bringing all of these elements together, really truly global multiculturalism that transcends centuries, which I think is magnificent, and how beautifully she incorporates that into her work. So she says herself, "I'm like an author with my clothes. I like to tell a romantic story, a fairy tale." The narrative is always very important to her, to Guo Pei. And where her next story is this collection that she created while she was pregnant. And she said at the Bowers, which I completely can't even imagine her seeing, that she felt short and round, and so her collection is in a way short and round. But there is an important influence. Now, the Howe Collective photographers, the sense of her being a mushroom in this kind of earthy environment kind of really works. But she had another influence. This is a collection that's called An Amazing Journey in a Childhood Dream, and both East and West. And I will tell you, when you look at the piece, look at her jacket. This little short, I say bolero, gives you the hint of where she got her inspiration from. And her inspiration comes from 17th century Spain. Another way of beautiful embroidery, three-dimensional embroidery, how she incorporates 17th century Spain. Interesting, beautiful embroidery with glass beads, and the color palette is very different because here she was thinking about having a baby, the baby rooms, baby soft pastel colors, which all influences this work. But what I want to show you is the chrysanthemum flower that goes around, which represents longevity. And, well, of course, the toreador, the bolero, the influence of Spain, past and present, and how she felt the toreador also in a way of going to battle with the bull, with the perchance of losing his life at this moment, with dressed so gorgeously and so elegantly. And you could see the raised embroidery, the roundels that are on the toreador's magnificent bolero, and how beautiful that is for Guo Pei. And here is a piece from the runway where you can actually see her toreador pants. Those were probably the easiest shoes to walk down the runway. The models all wear the shoes and they all walk down the runway. So here we'll show you that collection, which is another one of the Howe Collective composites, which is really beautiful. It's a composite of 3 different gardens in Atlanta and Savannah, and how you can see each of those roundels, the round pieces, the lilac is all individually cut pieces of silk, and the other dress is pleated to just the most incredible pleating technique and embroidery technique. So she loves queens. Guo Pei loves queens, and in the 1002 Nights, she was telling the story, really, we were going back to Scheherazade, and she was thinking about how Scheherazade had to be so smart to tell this king who was chopping everybody's head off, telling him enough stories, how her intelligence saved her and a lot of other women. So she refers to a lot of queens, and here, this magnificent embroidery, this was one of the centerpieces also of the Bowers collection, refers back to 18th century, the panniers, but also she's looking at the Spanish Infanta, and she's looking also at the Tudor style, Tudor England, and these combinations of what's called a farthingale, which is a different shaped skirt. So that is very interesting. And both of them, this is a 1652, it's a Velázquez, and on the right is a fashion illustration from 1577, which is quite beautiful. So now here, one of my favorite pieces in the entire collection is the fabulous Ming vase dress. And when I first saw this, I have to tell you, I went, oh, I cannot believe that they took this, and there's water, a composite, definitely. So let's talk about this Ming vase dress and the kind of work that went into this. So you have to understand that blue and white is one of the most iconic. When you see blue and white porcelain, you identify it with the Ming Dynasty right away. So for Guo Pei, this had a personal feeling. And you see Ming Dynasty 1368 to 1644 is Chinese porcelain at the height of refinement. So what she did was took the fan, and in this way actually defying the laws of gravity of draping, because we don't know how she draped this. But it also looked like shards of porcelain. But the other thing I want to say is look at the image on the left. Guo Pei does not use computers. She doesn't like any kind of technology that way. So she draws out everything, and she works with her artisans, and they hand painted this piece is hand painted, layered with embroidery. Now, hand paint from the paint from Persia, which is where a lot of the Ming Dynasty, the blue came from Persian blue dye. She took blue dye, she dyed the piece, she embroidered over the piece, then they jewel the piece. So you have this multi-layer of this intense blue that in any place that you're looking at from a distance, from any place, you can see how gorgeous this is. And it is really, the fan is also another iconic piece. It's really a tour de force. It's an incredible, incredible piece that is in the collection. And here you see it, shards of porcelain and magnificently done, beautiful. So I like to show this picture because we know that models are tall, and we know that Guo Pei's an average height, but we know that that model is wearing something that is making her especially gigantically tall. So let's look at this, because her influence comes from the Empress Dowager and the Manchu shoe, not the lotus foot. So she loves to reference this dynasty, and she has this height, which is also the Manchu shoe, the Chopin, which we see in Venice as early as the 16th, 15th century in Venice. So, you know, you think about Marco Polo going through and carrying these ideas through with him. And here's Guo Pei in her workshop, carving out the pieces, working with the artisan. She is everywhere. She has her hand on every piece and everything that really is there. And this is a major source of pride for her, that she is so involved with her work, her team, her workers, her artisans, to create this vision that she has, this stupendous vision. And these are some of the shoes that we actually got to see at the Bowers Museum in the 1002 collection. And here she is trying shoes on. Yes, they do walk down the runway in these shoes, which I really do love to show. So another important theme for Guo Pei is flowers and nature. There is a kingdom in a flower, a wisdom in a leaf. I always find the power of nature fascinating, especially when the flowers are blossoming. So we'll see a couple of pieces in her collection that this was in the Bowers. A magnificent piece, actually stunning. And I made sure that when we did our tour, we didn't look at the piece from the straight on as that we're looking at it now, that we had to look at it from the side, because then you saw there's references to 18th century panniers and the style there. But what's incredible about this piece is that it's made with strips of bamboo. From the Hebei province is where the bamboo forest is. She worked with her bamboo artisans, and she had the most magnificent technique of weaving and stripping the bamboo very thin and weaving the bamboo that it looks as if it's floating, but it's all about the nature. And then the flowers are there on there. So that piece, which I really love to talk about, we could not find this photograph in the Bowers Museum, was actually inspired by a photograph that she saw at the Bowers a few years before she created this image. And you can see how the influence of Africa. It was a little African boy standing on this gigantic tree. And so she has the Maasai necklace, and this magnificent woman is there. And she's embraced by all of this nature. This collection was very personal for her, because as we start to talk about sustainability and everything that's happening on our planet now, to bring awareness, the conversation of awareness through Guo Pei's clothes is what's essential. The beauty is overwhelming and breathtaking, but the message is as equally important for her. So we will look at this wonderful composite. It has a Game of Thrones feeling to it, from the book that SCAD produced called Beyond Couture, with this beautiful piece, and we'll see that closer up right here. Magnificent, magnificent, the Legend of the Dragon, and much more referential to Qing Dynasty style robe, but of course pushing the envelope a little bit with the dragging. But it's the flowers that's very important, these roses. that she saw her grandmother had in a little box that she kept hidden. And so her grandmother would show her this box of these hand-painted flowers, and she had to find this technique again, and she did that. And here it is, this beautiful gown, the dragon, holding very special significance in Chinese culture, nobility of character, wisdom, benevolence, heroism, and perseverance. And I must say, in a very irreverent gesture, perhaps in the dynasty days, she uses the 5-clawed dragon, which is only reserved for the emperor, but Guo Pei empowers her women that they could use the 5-clawed dragon. And this is done beautifully. It's got a modern feeling to it, done with traditional Chinese embroidery. And we'll just take a look at this in the theme of nature, with nature going and her flowers, this wonderful composite. This is actually an oak tree in Savannah, Georgia, with the models standing around in her collection that she did for, which was really so much fun, for MAC Cosmetics. So here she's having fun with Western silhouettes, really, and the flowers that she did for MAC, this fabulous beauty collection that I understand debuted at the Newport, in the mall in Newport. If anybody has any of the pieces of this makeup collection, do not give it away. Save it, hold on to it. Guo Pei designed everything from the wigs to the hair pieces to the shoes and the mannequins also. And you see a shape that's very different, but the technique, the embroidery technique, is magnificent with these 3-dimensional flowers, and the color palette is very different. It's much lighter, and it's just, I don't know. She also incorporated brass flowerets. It's very pretty and very light. And this is part of that collection also. So I had to show you this 18th century robe à la Française on the left. And here is a gorgeous piece, beautifully done, and referencing that kind of the panier and this corset externally worn in the 20th century. This is what people were doing. Madonna was wearing, like wearing infra apparel, we called it, and wearing your underwear on the outerwear. So this stomacher piece, and that she's done this magnificent embroidery, 3-dimensional, from the gorgeous brass headpiece to the embroidered skirt, which is just magnificent and beautiful. We'll take a look at it close up. The pagodas, and we can see some of the references, the pagoda references, of course, a Chinese Asian reference, and the porcelain pieces that would reference these pagodas. But look at the combination of embroidery with Swarovski crystal and brass flowerets. Just, it's a tour de force. It's just magnificent. And there's a bee somewhere in there that suggests the busy bee and working together. And the butterflies, which I got to see the butterflies in Orange County leaving, traveling, and the butterflies represent industriousness and long life. And I guess because they travel long distances, so there's this auspicious element to a lot of the iconography that she's using here. And you have to think of this not as fashion. What Guo Pei is doing really is 3-dimensional. It's sculpture. It's quite beautiful and magnificent. And so I love this about her. I love that she doesn't want her work to be trend. She's not interested in trend. Changing your look every season to please a fickle customer isn't how I work. I aim to create heirlooms. Wonderful. And quite honestly, in what's happening in our world today, heirlooms could not be more significant. And so I want to talk about just some of these things also. She does embroidery that doesn't necessarily have auspicious Chinese characters, but this Art Deco piece references beautifully this embroidery, so gorgeous. And I want to just show you the combination of 2 different centuries. On the left, 18th century robe à la Polonaise, And on the right is a 1920s robe de style, which was a 1920s style, had a fuller skirt than what we think about the 1920s. By Madame Lanvin. Guo Pei is going to do her homework, and she does this beautifully. And talk about references. Guo Pei has other interesting references, and she has a feeling for Tim Burton's movie, this one particularly, The Corpse Bride, which if you haven't seen it, you have to see it, just your homework for tonight. And she also, you know, this is fun for her. She gets inspiration from other sources. This is about a character that dies, comes back to life, and there's something about the branch, but look at how magnificent it's interpreted. It's just gorgeous. So to see this in real life is magnificent, but to see how she's taken this Western silhouette, but has put this beautiful, traditional, modernized this embroidery to the height of the highest couture there. So I want to talk about Saint Gallen for a minute, because one of her latest collections, now there's been since the collection, is this cathedral in Switzerland built in the 8th century. And so she was exploring her concept of sacredness. And here, this church was called, it had a name as Selina Patheke, which means heart consoling place. She went into this cathedral, was inspired by this cathedral, not just by the architecture, but the interior and the domes and the shapes. And so what she thinks about is, this is 8th century, and how many centuries it takes, the building upon, the time it takes, in a lot of ways, that faith and the time it takes, she likens that to her own work. So we had see a piece at Bowers that is definitely a direct influence from the towers of St. Gallen. But I want to tell you, Guo Pei, in her way of being a fashion historian, extraordinaire researcher, I went back in time and showed this Yves Saint Laurent wedding dress from 1965. It's marvelous. And so if you were to see this in real life, and the inside it was lighted, you can see all of these individual beads. And the other component of this was the fabric, you touched it and your imprint was on the fabric. And so while her artisans were working on it, they kind of left their fingerprints. And to her, that was very personal. She really loved the component of the fabric, how they responded to her. This is the interior of St. Gallen. And so look at the cupola, the interior of the dome, the painting on the dome. What they did was work for 18 months to produce, to print that onto the sheerest, most incredible silk. And you had to look from different sides and angles to see how glorious the printing was done. I still don't know how the model walked down the runway. Somebody please tell me, that's one of those couture secrets. But referencing ecclesiastical dress, that collection references Chinese embroidery technique, Western technique, 17th and 18th century embroidery, and this beautiful piece, which was 8.89 meters weight of the fabric. But again, it's something that unfortunately the visuals don't allow us to see how beautifully printed this was, and how the shape here is an ecclesiastical shape. And my student actually pointed out this to me, and as we were walking through the gallery, she said, I think that the gloves are dragons. I think they're dragons. If you look at the gloves and the hand, you can see the dragons and how gorgeous that is. And I want to show you the interior, the organ, the grill work on the organ. And I want to show you this magnificent piece that was, I mean, at that time it was the end of the Game of Thrones, and I was thinking, oh my God, this would be just such a fantastic piece for the Game of Thrones. This is the warrior gown, and it integrates Guo's reflections on the spirit of devotion and divine power, and her appreciation of handcraft and referencing the faith of medieval warriors, saints, heavenly goddesses, and a spectacle, spiritual spectacle of mystery and romance. And I'm going to end this with this last image of piece from the Asia Civilization Museum. The piece that they owned, which is on the left, which is a Peronican wedding piece that Guo Pei saw at the Musée Quai Branly in Paris. She saw an exhibition and realized that the Angela baby wedding dress, which is the one directly in the center, was what Guo Pei did, and using that as a reference, that's how they came to get this collection together. So this is the direction now that Guo Pei wants to go in, wedding dresses. There's not a lot about traditional wedding dresses, red being a traditional color. And what she's doing now is she's creating wedding dresses for modern brides that often wear white wedding dresses traditionally. And they wear these now for the tea ceremony, they're wearing traditional. And so there's such wonderful stories and passion around what Guo Pei is doing for these dresses, and the amount of embroidery and dedication, and that she worked with a woman who said to her, I have $8,000, this is my savings, but I want you to make a wedding dress for my daughter. And she said, this is a very expensive undertaking. And the woman said, but I will have this, we'll have this for the rest of our lives, and we'll pass it down. And that's what she's going for, is this level of quality of technique, but heirloom status, the magnificence of passing something down, of creating tradition again in a beautiful, elegant way. And so I say, my last quote is really her quote. All this is part of my culture. It's in my blood. I want to bring our tradition into modernity, and I think she's doing an incredible job of doing that. So, someone have a question for me? Yes, for sure. Good. Absolutely. We'll definitely have social distancing apparel. Thank you. So Mary has a problem. She doesn't live in a world of reality. Well, I don't know if that's a question or not. So how does a bride plan to have a dress designed by Guo Pei when many engagements are shorter than the time needed to create a dress? That's a good question. The designs that she's doing for the bridal don't take 2 years. She's got a system where it's less work, it's less embroidery, unless the piece has been passed down. It's not the level of couture, embroidery, time restraint, size, scale. So I think that's how she's answering that. So let's see, we've got 2 more. Connections to Chinese heritage are minimal. How many people go to the Met Gala? 50, any more? Okay, well, I'm so sorry, Mary. Who else? Who else? Somebody else? Question, wait, hold on. Most of these things, honestly, are not meant to be worn. She's creating these things to show the highest level of technique, which is what couture is. Very often, things go down the runway that are not meant to be worn, but are meant to show the level of the house, the quality of the techniques, and the workmanship they can do in that particular house. No, someone asked me what the next collection's theme's going to be. We have no idea. Our lives have been changed. Couture will not show in July. So I don't know the answer to that question. So I'm answering a couple of questions and one question. Somebody else have a question they want to ask me? Let's see. Guo Pei's actually been worn. I think I answered that. She does have clothes that she bakes for women. And if you go onto her website, you can see them. These are her art pieces. These are not clothes meant to be worn. And I should really preface this at the beginning of my talk by saying that this is the highest level of workmanship and creation. And in a way, it is sculpture and it is her art. It's how she's representing her art. Let's see. The Bower's going to get the porcelain dress. I can't answer that question. I'm going to think maybe Kelly.
So just in regards to the exhibition coming up, we are going to have another Guo Pei exhibition. It will open in February. Right now we're planning and hoping for February 14th, but as you all know, the world is in flux, so best laid plans. The checklist is actually still evolving, so what will be in the show is still evolving. And it will not, though, be any of the same dresses. So it's all new, fresh. What's really exciting is that Guo Pei has such a warm heart and a generous heart, and is really allowing us access to pieces that haven't been seen yet outside the runway. And so we're still in talks and still getting news that we can have new pieces that are even more exciting than we thought. And so that's why the checklist is still changing. Once we have it down, I will be putting it on the website, and you'll be able to see not the full list, but you'll be able to see some images, highlights from what will be on view. So I can't say exactly what will be there, but it'll definitely be an exciting show. I'll let you.
So I think someone also asked about the models going down the runway, and they really do go down in those shoes. Yes, they do. They did. They did. We don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know what her next collection is going to look like or be, but they have gone down the runway in those shoes. And let me explain, a platform is easier to walk in than a pitched heel, because at a platform your foot is like this. And so there is that difference. Pitch, that, just walking along. It's the weight of the piece, but that's significant also for Guo Pei, because she believes that carrying the weight is what women do. So it's metaphoric for her. And it's interesting. I don't know if the exhibit will go to other cities. They have done, yes. I'm not sure about the dress. Other questions? Let me see down here. Part 2, yes, it's going to come. We'll get a part 2, which is very exciting. I hope to come back with part 2 and take everybody through again and see new things. The exhibition at the Asia Civilization Museum was very interesting because they took a very Eastern perspective, showing a lot of the pieces from their collection, the decorative art pieces, vases from Peronican family rose porcelain, pieces from 18th century, pieces from 14th century. Next to the garments, there was a beautiful Chinese Ming plate next to the Ming vase dress. When you see those combinations together, it's very interesting and beautiful. That's an expression. The clothes, these things that she makes are an expression of her culture. And she's employing 500 artisans. She's revived a technique that would have been obsolete, and she's recreated this idea of cultural heritage. UNESCO calls the embroidery that she's doing an intangible cultural heritage. When am I coming back to the Bowers? Is that my Ellen? Is that my favorite Ellen Winter? Hi, Ellen. I'm not sure yet, but I will come back. I'll come back. Thank you, thank you, thank you, everybody. I have time for, somebody asked a question, why are the models so thin? Why are models so thin? I don't know how to answer that question. I really don't. I think it goes back to photography and how you don't see the models, you see the clothes. I also will say too that a lot of designers are not using thin models. There's been a resistance to that. There's a lot more diversity on the runway in terms of plus sizes and figures. So our world has changed significantly, and it will be very interesting to see what happens on the other side. So that was that. Thank you, Karen. The book is wonderful. Yes. Thank you, Judy B. I'm happy that you feel that way. And yes, you'll have this, I think, on the Bowers website. Kelly will put it on the Bowers YouTube website. And Kelly has my information. You're welcome to send me any comments, anything, questions you have about that. And I can't wait to come back. I love California and Orange County, and my friends at the Newport Decorative Arts group, thank you so much, because they visited quite often. So I think I'm supposed to be done now. Am I right, Kelly? Am I going by?
Yes, I think that's it. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks to all of our members who joined us. It was fantastic.
Bye-bye.
And I know that I'm sure that they did too. So thank you so much for doing this. Thank you to our members for being here. And I'm going to go ahead and
come back.
Yeah, we so look forward to having you. So thank you so much again, everyone. Thanks, and have a wonderful night. Stay healthy and safe. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. You too. It's you have it tough out there in Savannah, Georgia. It's just been a little interesting, but I will be back. Kelly will get me back, and I'm happy to do any other talks that they ask me to do.
Great.
Bye, Bowers. Love you.
Thank you.